What if I told you that a single library record from 1977 hinted at one of the greatest literary mysteries of all time? A missing manuscript, a lost story, a secret that was never meant to be found. Agatha Christie, the queen of crime, wrote over 80 novels, but there was one she never published. A final Miss Marple case that was supposed to be her ultimate mystery, but the manuscript vanished. For years, no one knew if it was real. No one had proof. Until 1977, when a single library entry surfaced, a record listing a final manuscript A. Christie. But when researchers went to retrieve it, the file was gone, erased, as if it had never existed. Who took it? Why was it hidden? And what was in that last story that made it disappear forever? Stories can be forgotten. They can be misplaced, shelved away in the quiet corners of old libraries, gathering dust. But some stories don't just disappear. Some are removed, erased, as if they were never meant to exist at all. In the world of literature, few names hold the weight of Agatha Christie, the woman who mastered the art of deception, who turned crime into an intricate puzzle, whose stories always came with an answer. But what if there was one mystery she never solved? A final case, a last manuscript, a story that was written and then vanished without a trace. For decades, it was nothing more than a whisper, a rumor passed among scholars and collectors, a manuscript that had never been published, a case that Miss Marple was meant to solve, but never did. And then in 1977, something appeared. A clue, a single library record buried deep in the archives, a record that should not exist. 4 words, final manuscript A. Christie. No title, no description, no details, just an entry typed into a catalog, hidden among thousands of forgotten works. It should have been a breakthrough, proof that the manuscript was real, that the story had once existed. But when researchers requested to see it, there was nothing, no file, no document, no record that it had ever been logged at all. Mistakes happen. Records can be misplaced. Files can be lost. But this wasn't just a missing book. This was something different, because those who searched a manuscript, those who had heard whispers of its existence, found more than just empty shelves. They found missing pages from letters Christie had written in her final years. They found mentions of the story in old correspondences, references that were later crossed out, scratched away, left unfinished. And those who had spoken about it, those who had once claimed they had seen it, one by one they stopped talking altogether. What was in those pages? What had Agatha Christie written that someone, somewhere, wanted to keep hidden? Was it just another crime novel, or was it something else entirely? Some say the manuscript was simply another mystery, one that got lost in the shuffle of time, that it was forgotten, just like so many unpublished works of history. But others are not so sure, because the more you look, the stranger the story becomes. And the more you search, the more it feels like something is searching back. This is not just the story of a missing manuscript. This is the story of something that was never supposed to be found. A final case that Agatha Christie may have taken to her grave. A manuscript that, if it ever existed, may still be out there, waiting, hidden, or worse, destroyed before it could ever be read. Stories endure. They survive the passage of time, the fading of ink, the dust that settles over forgotten pages. But what happens when a story is not simply misplaced, but deliberately removed? What happens when a tale vanishes so completely that even those who should have remembered it refuse to speak of it? This is where our story begins. Not in the pages of a mystery novel, but in real life, within the carefully constructed world of Agatha Christie, the queen of crime, a woman whose mind was a labyrinth of deception, whose words held secrets so masterfully woven that even the most seasoned readers found themselves misled, their assumptions turned against them. Her mysteries always had an answer, but this one does not. For decades, her stories have captivated millions. Hercule Poirot, with his relentless logic and meticulous order, dissected crimes with precision. Miss Marple, the unassuming yet razor-sharp spinster from St. Mary Mead, unraveled deceptions with the ease of someone who had seen it all before. But what if there was one final case? A story so different, so unsettling, that it never reached the public? What if Agatha Christie wrote something that was meant to be her ultimate mystery and then it was taken away? Some believe that in the late 1960s, Christie began writing her last Miss Marple novel, a final case, a mystery that would surpass them all. But when she finished, it was never published. There was no announcement, no draft submitted to her editors, no mention of it among her carefully archived documents. It simply wasn't there. For years, it was dismissed as a myth, a rumor, whispered among scholars and collectors. There was no evidence, no proof, just speculation, until something changed, until one clue appeared, a fragment of a letter, a note scribbled in Christie's own handwriting, found in the margins of an unrelated document. 8 words, hastily written, nearly lost to time. Miss Marple's last case. I cannot finish it. What did she mean by those words? Why couldn't she finish it? Had she lost interest? Had the story grown too complicated? Or was there another reason? A reason she could not, or would not, explain. In 1975, just a year before her death, Agatha Christie was asked about her unpublished works. She had written 2 final novels, one for Poirot, one for Miss Marple, both locked away, meant to be released only after her passing. But when the time came, only one surfaced. Sleeping Murder, Miss Marple's supposed last case. But was it really? Or was there another story, one that had been buried? What happened in the final years of Agatha Christie's life remains a mystery of its own. By 1973, her health had begun to decline. Those closest to her noted changes, small at first, but growing more apparent. Confusion, forgetfulness. Some claim she may have begun to suffer from the early stages of dementia, that her mind, once razor-sharp, was beginning to slip. Others are not so sure, because in those final years she wrote less, she spoke less, and, according to those who knew her, she worried more. But about what? A lost manuscript? A story too dangerous to tell? Or something even stranger, something that had left the pages of fiction and entered the real world? After Christie's passing in 1976, her estate was carefully combed through. Every draft, every letter, every unfinished novel was cataloged. And yet, the supposed last Miss Marple case was nowhere to be found. There was no manuscript, no notes, no reference in her official records. It was as if the story had never existed at all. This should have been the end of the mystery, but it wasn't, because then something surfaced, something that shouldn't have existed. In 1977, during a routine inventory check at a private London library, an unusual record was discovered. A single line in the archive catalog, a document registered but never retrieved. The entry read, Final Manuscript A. Christie. A discovery like this should have changed everything. It was proof that the manuscript had existed, that somewhere, locked away, Miss Marple's final case had been completed. But when researchers went to retrieve it, there was nothing. No file, no record of who logged it, no sign that it had ever been there at all. This was more than a clerical error. This was more than a lost file, because the moment the request was made to retrieve the manuscript, something changed. Documents that once referenced the lost story were gone, mentions of it in old letters erased. And those who had once spoken of it, they denied ever knowing anything at all. Why? Who was trying to erase the story? And more importantly, what was in those pages that made it disappear? Some believe Christie destroyed herself, that the final Miss Marple case was never meant to be read. Others believe someone else made that decision for her. But then there are those who think the manuscript still exists, that it is still out there, hidden, locked away where only a few can find it, and that someday it may finally be uncovered. A missing story, a manuscript that was never meant to be found, a legend that could have faded into obscurity, if not for a single entry in a catalog, a record that, by all logic, should not have existed. 1977, a year after Agatha Christie's passing, a time when her works were more valuable than ever, studied by scholars, sought after by collectors. It was during this time that a private library in London, known for housing rare and unpublished literary works, conducted an inventory, a routine process, nothing more. But among the thousands of records buried deep within pages of cataloged entries was one that stood out, one that made no sense, one that should not have been there. Final Manuscript A. Christie. No title, no description, no explanation, just those 4 words. A quiet anomaly in an otherwise ordinary archive. The librarian who discovered it at first thought nothing of it. Perhaps an old, misfiled document, a draft that had been mistakenly logged. But then came the request. A researcher, following a rumor, had asked to see it, to read it, to confirm its existence. The request was denied. The librarian, confused, searched through the archives, the shelves, the storage rooms. There was nothing, no manuscript, no document, nothing that matched the catalog entry. It was as if the book had never been there at all. But mistakes happen. Files are misplaced. Books go missing. This could have been nothing more than a simple error. And yet, the more they searched, the stranger it became. Because there were no records of when it had been logged, no initials marking who had entered it, no accompanying notes. And the most disturbing detail of all, no one could remember ever filing it in the first place. The missing file was not the only thing that was off. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. Mentions of the manuscript that had once been noted in letters, in correspondence between collectors, disappeared. Old discussions once recorded were no longer accessible, as if something or someone was actively erasing its existence. One librarian, who had personally handled the inventory, spoke briefly about the record to a colleague. Days later, when asked again, he denied ever seeing it. His demeanor had changed. His words were careful, measured, rehearsed, as if he had been warned. The researcher who had originally asked to see the manuscript, he stopped returning phone calls, stopped responding to letters, and then he disappeared from public discussion entirely. Weeks passed, then months. The manuscript was never found. The record was never explained. And then one day it was gone. The catalog was updated. The entry was removed. No record of its deletion. No explanation. Just gone. Officially, it had never existed. This was no accident. Books do not erase themselves. Files do not delete themselves. Someone, somewhere, had made a decision to ensure that Miss Marple's last case would never be read, that the truth, whatever it was, would never be uncovered, that this would remain Agatha Christie's greatest unsolved mystery. But here's the question that lingers, the one detail that cannot be ignored. If this manuscript was never meant to be seen, then why did it leave behind a record? Stories have power. Words, once written, can carry truths far beyond the pages they were meant to stay on. But some stories, they do more than entertain. Some stories expose. Some reveal secrets not meant to be spoken. And when a story like that is written, it has a way of disappearing. What was in Agatha Christie's missing manuscript? What did she write that made it vanish? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, was it really fiction? For years, theories have swirled. At first, the whispers suggested it was just another case, another puzzle for Miss Marple to solve. But then something changed. The rumors became more specific, more chilling. Some began to say that this final case was unlike any other, that it was never meant to be just a story. The details are unclear, but if the rumors are to be believed, the final case of Miss Marple was not about an ordinary crime. It was about something real, a murder that had already happened, a death that had already been sealed away in history, a case that, for reasons no one could explain, mirrored an actual event that had taken place years before the manuscript was written. Some say the story was set in London, a quiet neighborhood, a respectable home, the kind of place where terrible things aren't supposed to happen. And yet, within the pages of that missing manuscript, there was a crime, a murder, one that, in every detail, reflected a real-life case from the 1960s, an unsolved death that had left more questions than answers. The real crime, the one that supposedly inspired Christie's lost manuscript, was never solved. The case involved a high-profile figure, someone within London's elite society, a person with power, influence, a person who, on the surface, had no enemies, and yet, one night, they simply vanished. When they were found, there was no explanation, no evidence that made sense, no clear suspect. It was the kind of mystery that, if told by any other writer, might have been dismissed as coincidence. But Agatha Christie was no ordinary writer. She was meticulous. Every detail in her stories had purpose. Every character, every motive, every crime. It was all carefully constructed, which is why, when whispers began to spread that the missing manuscript described the real case too accurately, people started asking questions. Was this merely inspiration? A writer drawing from history? Or had Christie uncovered something she was never meant to see? Then came the unsettling part. The thing that makes this story more than just a missing manuscript. Because if this book had been an innocent work of fiction, why did those who claimed to have read it before it vanished refuse to talk about it? A literary scholar, who allegedly saw the draft in Christie's archives, once told a colleague that the story was too close to the truth, that if it were ever published, it would open doors that should remain closed. And then, just as quickly as he spoke of it, he never mentioned it again. A collector who claimed to have handled the manuscript in an estate sale in the late 1970s described it as dangerous. When pressed, he refused to elaborate. When asked for proof, he denied ever seeing it. When the topic was brought up again, he disappeared from the public eye altogether. There is one final detail, one thing that no one has been able to explain. A single cryptic phrase, reportedly written on the last page of the manuscript before it disappeared forever. A phrase that, according to those who saw it, was unlike anything Agatha Christie had ever written before. It did not say the end. It did not conclude with a neat resolution of her other works. Instead, it left behind something unfinished. A final line that read, "Some stories should remain untold." Was this a message? A warning? Or was it something more? Something that even the queen of crime herself was afraid to reveal? And if that's true, then who made sure we would never read it? Information can disappear. Files can be lost. Records can be erased. But people leave behind traces. A conversation. A letter. A quiet remark that lingers in the air just long enough to be remembered. And when something is meant to stay buried, those traces become a problem. For decades, the missing manuscript was nothing more than a curiosity, a rumor among collectors, a mystery in literary circles. But those who followed it closely, those who looked just a little too hard, began to notice something strange. The people who knew about the manuscript had a way of disappearing. The pattern is subtle, a name mentioned briefly in an interview, only for the person to stop speaking about it altogether. A researcher who seemed close to an answer, only for their work to vanish. And then, there were the ones who never had the chance to tell their story. Joan was more than just Agatha Christie's secretary. She was the gatekeeper, the one who handled personal letters, who transcribed notes, who saw drafts before anyone else. If there was a final Miss Marple case, Joan would have known about it. And in 1976, just months after Christie's passing, Joan was found dead in her home. The official cause? An accidental fall. She was alone at the time. There were no witnesses. No one to say what had really happened in those last moments. But there was something strange about it. Something that didn't quite fit. Joan had no history of health issues. No signs of struggle. No explanation as to why. After years of working alongside one of the world's greatest mystery writers, she would die just as questions about a missing manuscript began to surface. Then there was a literary scholar, a researcher whose name was whispered among those who followed the manuscript's trail. He had spent years studying Agatha Christie's works, dissecting her letters, uncovering patterns that others had overlooked. And one day he found something. According to his colleagues, he had uncovered a reference, a direct mention of the missing manuscript. a note in one of Christie's correspondences, possibly a letter sent to a publisher, suggesting that her final Miss Marple case was not just a rumor, that it had been written, that it had been completed, and then it had been locked away. He told a close friend that he was onto something big, that if he could prove the manuscript existed, it would change everything, that he would finally have the answer. Days later, he was dead. The circumstances were unusual. The official statement called it natural causes. But those who knew him said otherwise. He had been healthy. He had no medical history of concern. And yet, just as he was preparing to release his findings, just as he was about to go public, his research disappeared with him. The documents he had gathered, gone. The notes he had written, destroyed. There was no record of what he had found, no way to retrace his steps, as if someone had erased every piece of evidence he had ever uncovered. 2 deaths. 2 people who had access to something they weren't supposed to. 2 people who, had they lived just a little longer, might have been able to answer the question that has haunted researchers for decades. But they weren't the only ones. A rare book collector, known for acquiring unpublished works, stopped answering letters after claiming he had seen references to the manuscript. When a journalist tracked him down years later, he refused to speak. He acted as if he had never mentioned it at all, as if he had never even heard of it. A publisher, who had once hinted in private conversations that there was one Christie novel the world would never see, was asked about it in an interview. He laughed it off. His tone was light, but his hands were shaking. What is the line between coincidence and something more? How many people can disappear from a mystery before it stops being a coincidence at all? Some believe it is just that, unfortunate timing, nothing more. But others are not so sure, because the closer you look, the more you start to see a pattern. A story that doesn't just end with a missing manuscript, but with those who got too close to finding it. And if that's the case, then the next question is even more unsettling. What happens to the person who finds it next? Stories do not simply vanish. They do not erase themselves from history. For something to disappear so completely, so thoroughly that no trace remains, it must have been made to disappear. Someone, somewhere, had to have removed it. And so the question remains, what happened to Miss Marple's final case? The last story Agatha Christie may have ever written? The manuscript that, if it truly existed, should have been one of the greatest literary discoveries of all time? How could something so valuable, so important, be wiped from history, leaving behind only whispers and dead ends? There are theories that stretch from the logical to the unthinkable. Some believe the manuscript never existed at all, that the entire mystery is nothing more than a misremembered conversation, a lost idea never put to paper. But if that were true, then why were there records? Why did a library catalog it? Why did those who claimed to have seen it refuse to speak? So we must ask ourselves, if the manuscript once existed, if it was real, then where is it now? And why has it never been found? One possibility is that Agatha Christie herself made the decision, that she wrote the story, completed it, and then, before it could ever be published, she destroyed it. Perhaps she feared the reaction it would bring. Perhaps she felt it was too revealing. Or perhaps she saw something in it that disturbed even her. We know that Christie was meticulous with her work. Every sentence, every word, carefully chosen. But she was also private, guarded, protective of her legacy. It is not unthinkable that, in her final years, she came to regret something she had written, that she took the pages, one by one, and fed them to the fire, watching as the words turned to ash, ensuring that they would never be read. There is precedent for this. Other great authors have destroyed their own works, fearing they were too personal, too dangerous, or simply unfinished. And yet, something about this theory does not sit right. If Christie had truly burned the manuscript, why are there traces of it? A letter, scribbled with the words, Miss Marple's last case. I cannot finish it. A library entry in 1977, listing a final manuscript, A. Christie. These are not the marks of a story that never existed. They are the fingerprints of something that was there and then was removed. And here's a question that lingers. If she did destroy it, did she do alone? There's another possibility, one that suggests the manuscript was not destroyed, but instead hidden, that somewhere, locked away in a private collection, Miss Marple's last case still exists, waiting, untouched, unread, sealed behind vault doors that only a select few have access to. Could it be possible that Christie herself gave instructions to have it locked away? A final request, ensuring that her last work would never see the light of day? Or did someone else make that decision for her? We know that certain unpublished works, especially those considered controversial, have been sealed away before, hidden from the public, classified, only to be released decades later. Could the same have been done to this manuscript? Could a publisher, a legal representative, or even a private collector have taken it and ensure it would never be read? And if so, the question becomes, who holds a key? Who has the power to decide when, if ever, this manuscript will resurface? There are whispers that certain archives hold materials deemed too sensitive for public consumption, documents that are sealed not for reasons of legality, but for reasons of control. Could the last Miss Marple case be among them? Locked away not because it was unfinished, not because it was unworthy, but because of what it contained. And if that is true, then who decided that the world should never see it? And then there's a final theory, the one that raises the most unsettling possibility of all, that the manuscript was not destroyed, that it was not locked away in some archive, that it was taken, stolen, removed from existence by someone who did not want it to be read. This theory is the most disturbing because it suggests that whatever was in those pages was dangerous, that it revealed something, that it told a story someone did not want told. What if Miss Marple's final case was not fiction? What if, buried within its pages, was something more, a truth disguised as a mystery, a crime that was never meant to be solved? The rumors have long suggested that the lost manuscript bore an eerie resemblance to a real-life unsolved case from the 1960s, a case that involved high society, power, influence, a crime that, despite its high profile, was never fully explained. If this is true, if Agatha Christie had taken real events and woven them into fiction, then we must ask, was someone watching? Was someone paying attention? And when the manuscript was completed, when the words were typed onto the page, did someone decide that it could never be read? And if this was the case, then the next question is even more chilling. Did Agatha Christie know? Did she realize in those final years that she had written something too close to the truth? Did she understand that she had created a story that could never be told? Or did she, like everyone else, think it was simply another mystery until it was too late? These theories leave us with more questions than answers. If the manuscript was destroyed, then why do traces of it remain? If it was hidden, then who holds a key? And if it was taken, if it was stolen, then who had the power to remove it so completely and why? Perhaps the manuscript is still out there, locked away, waiting for the right hands to open it. Perhaps it is buried in a private collection, protected by legal agreements, destined never to be read. Or perhaps it was taken long ago, wiped from existence, erased by those who understood that some story should never be told. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: Miss Marple's last case, if it ever existed, is no ordinary missing manuscript. It is a mystery of its own, a puzzle that no detective has yet been able to solve. And the deeper you look, the more it seems like someone never wanted it to be solved at all. So we are left with one final thought, a lingering question that refuses to fade. What if the most famous mystery writer of all time left behind one final mystery that no one was ever meant to uncover? Every story has an ending. Every mystery has a solution. But what happens when the person who created the mystery, the one who was meant to solve it, chooses to leave it unfinished? Agatha Christie spent her life constructing puzzles, shaping narratives that led to satisfying conclusions. No thread left loose, no question unanswered. And yet, somewhere in her final years, she wrote something that she could not complete, a case that she, the greatest mystery writer of all time, chose to leave unresolved. What was in those pages that made her stop? What detail, what revelation, what realization forced her put down her pen and never pick it up again? For years, there were only rumors. The lost manuscript, the erased records, the unexplained deaths of those who came too close. It was all speculation, a mystery wrapped in whispers. But then something surfaced, a trace of the past, hidden in plain sight, a letter, a personal note written in Christie's own hand, referencing something that should not have existed. It was brief, uneventful at first glance, but buried within its lines was something unsettling. A single sentence that has left historians, researchers, and collectors questioning everything. Miss Marple's last case. I can't bring myself to finish it. What did she mean by those words? Was it regret? Doubt? A crisis of confidence? Or was it something more? Christie was not a woman who abandoned her work. She had written Miss Marple's cases for decades. She had created intricate, methodical puzzles that captivated millions. And yet, this time, something stopped her. Something made her hesitate. Something made her walk away. It raises a question no one's been able to answer. What could Agatha Christie, the master of deception, the architect of impossible mysteries, not bring herself to write? Some believe it was illness, that in her later years, as her mind began to slip, she found herself unable to complete the final case, that the manuscript was abandoned not because of what was in it, but because she simply could not finish it. But this explanation does not hold up, because there is no record of a manuscript in progress. There is no draft, no scattered notes, no unfinished chapters locked away in storage. There is nothing, as if, after writing those words, after realizing she could not finish the case, she ensured that no one else ever would. But why? What was she afraid of? For those who have spent years searching for answers, this letter, this single line, is the only tangible proof that something was left unfinished. And yet, it presents more questions than it answers. Because if Christie was simply unable to finish the story, then why was there a library record of a completed manuscript in 1977? If she had abandoned it, then why did it appear cataloged, named, and logged before disappearing just as quickly? If there was nothing to hide, then why were people so afraid to speak of it? Perhaps the letter was her way of letting the world know that some stories are best left untold, that some mysteries, even when crafted by the finest minds, should remain locked away. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a final clue, a quiet message, a warning to those who would come searching for the truth. Miss Marple's final case. I can't bring myself to finish it. Was this the moment Christie realized she had written something that went too far? That she had uncovered something, whether intentional or by accident, that she was never meant to see? Was this the moment she decided that the manuscript could never be read? The story was never published. The pages were never found. The mystery, if it was ever meant to be solved, remains a question that lingers unanswered. And so we are left with only this: a missing manuscript, a cryptic letter, and a truth that no one has ever been able to uncover. But if the letter was a warning, if these words were meant to dissuade those who searched, then we are left with one final question. What happens when someone refuses to stop searching? There are stories we are meant to read, stories that make their way into the world, printed, bound, placed on shelves, waiting to be discovered. But then there are the others, the stories that do not make it to the light, the ones that are locked away, hidden, forgotten, or worse, erased. Agatha Christie was not just a storyteller. She was a master of deception, a woman who understood the power of secrets. And yet, in the final years of her life, she left behind a mystery she never solved, a case she could not bring herself to finish, a story that, if the whispers are to be believed, vanished not by accident but by design. For decades, the missing manuscript has remained a ghost, spoken of but never seen, a literary shadow, existing only in fragments, a cryptic library entry, a letter left behind, a series of events that do not add up. And through it all, one undeniable truth lingers. Someone, somewhere, made sure that the story would never be read. We have explored the possibilities. We have traced the missing threads. Was the manuscript destroyed, torn apart, burned, reduced to nothing but ash? Was it hidden, sealed in an archive, locked away where only a select few will ever know its existence? Or was it stolen, taken by someone who understood the weight of its words? Someone who knew that this was not just another Miss Marple case, but something far greater? And yet, despite all the theories, despite all the speculation, one question remains unanswered. What if the manuscript still exists? What if, right now, in some forgotten room, in some private collection, in some archive that the world has long since overlooked, the last Miss Marple case is still waiting? What if the pages remain intact, gathering dust, untouched, unread, kept in the hands of those who believe some mysteries should remain mysteries? And if that is the case, who are they keeping it from? The public or something else? Because if this manuscript holds the truth that so many believe it does, if it reveals something more than just another puzzle, another piece of fiction, then we must ask ourselves, who benefits from it staying hidden? And more importantly, what would happen if it was found? Perhaps the manuscript is lost forever. Perhaps it was destroyed, and this mystery will remain unsolved. But then again, perhaps it is waiting. Perhaps someone, someday, will uncover what was never meant to be seen. Perhaps you will be the one to find it. So we ask you what you believe. Was the manuscript destroyed, or is it still out there, buried beneath decades of secrecy, waiting for the right person to unearth it? Could it still exist, somewhere just beyond our reach? If you have a theory, we want to hear it. Could this lost story still be out there? Was it erased for a reason? Or is this one case that Miss Marple will never solve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want us to go deeper into this mystery, if you want to uncover more lost stories, forgotten secrets, and unsolved cases, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because some mysteries refuse to be forgotten, and the moment you stop searching is the moment they become lost forever.